Clabberton. Welcome to Conversing.
My great joy today to welcome David Brenner as our guest on Conversing. David is someone who has a deep legal background, graduated from Stanford as an undergraduate, came to Berkeley for his law degree, and practiced law for decades. And it's really been in more recent years, in the last decade, that he's stepped away from that and has been involved in a number of nonprofits, but principally in one that he was one of the primary instigators of, which I want you to understand and know about today, and that's part of the purpose of our conversation. It's called AI and Faith. David, welcome. We're so delighted that you're here.
It's wonderful to be with you, Mark.
You know, David, one of the things that is so impressive to me about the work of AI and Faith is that you're interested in it in such a broad way, but also that you take various primary topics and take them to some depth. And I'm very grateful for that combination because it feels like the whole debate field around AI seems already to be so highly segmented, understandably, because it's a vast enterprise. But I'd love it if you could just start by describing what AI and Faith is, and then take us to the bulletin board of your mind, as it were, and say, what are the, let's say, 3 to 5 major buckets of attention that you think AI is bringing to the surface that are prominent in your work in Faith and AI and in the society and culture that we're a part of?
I'd be happy to describe AI. First, AI and Faith is a channel into the ethics debate that's been developing over the past 6 or 7 years around how to have artificial intelligence and the applications it enables for human flourishing and not destruction. We're seeking to bring together sophisticated technologists and sophisticated theologians and philosophers and the various professions between them, like business, law, sociology, anthropology, psychology, for an integrated, deep approach to the questions that AI poses, rather than the sort of shallow corporate approach that is really based on utilitarianism mainly and what seems fair. Yes. We want to bring what we think of as the world's oldest wisdom to these newest problems and have a deep conversation.
Right.
As far as the areas that are of particular concern and also opportunity, we have focused on issues like attention and the way social media has proven to be a great distraction and a sort of destroyer of people's ability to focus. On the downside, on the other hand, the opportunities social media poses in missional work and in connection and bringing people together. It's a good example of an application that's powered by AI. A computer scientist wouldn't particularly think of that as an AI issue in itself, and yet we're finding that almost all of these major areas of engagement are related to artificial intelligence as an enabler.
Yes.
So we define it pretty broadly. So attention is one area, algorithmic decision-making, all of these apps that determine parole or sentencing in the criminal context, or whether you get hired, whether your resume goes in the junk pile or in the acceptable pile in employment, lots of other areas where that's happening. That's another big area where justice, transparency, some sense of being heard and seen are important. Then also the autonomous weaponry and the attempt to inculcate morality and decision-making on a moral ground into things like weapons or healthcare, compassion, the introduction of effective kinds of variables into the relationship between a computer and a person. And then surveillance and control, what we're seeing in China, another big area of concern. And now this rapidly developing new area of GPTs, large language models, and the convergence really of a number of different technologies all brought together by this AI type software.
Right. So when you think about those, which one is the one that keeps you awake in the middle of the night? Is there one that feels more concerning to you, or are they all so intertwined that they don't really play that way in the way you've been thinking about these issues?
I think the control issues and the loss of agency are probably the most concerning area. Of course, at its most extreme, that's this existential question of robot overlords. Are we really going to lose control of all aspects of our lives? But currently, we're seeing in China at the leading edge, the ability to control people through a convergence of facial identity, of data analytics and data surveillance in ways that, we've never before seen in practice. And so that's probably the biggest concern from a human liberty point of view and a human dignity point of view.
Yes, yes. And it's all intertwined, it seems to me, and to many other voices, that it's creating this transhumanism sort of movement where life is being seen as both something that involves human beings, but it also involves an interfusion, I guess would almost be the word, where the possibility of life extending beyond human agency in such a way as you've been describing, that in fact we lose control, we lose agency, we lose the capacity to be able to be the initiator of various things that matter so much to us about our identity, ourselves, our public relationships, our private relationships, and so forth, right? It's all cast in such a dehumanizing or potentially dehumanizing way and transferred to machines in the largest sense.
I think that is the several questions bound up in that. One is agency, really a big important question around who are we vis-a-vis these machines, who are we within our culture and society and the people who want to use artificial intelligence for control purposes. And then there's a question of category confusion, I think, too, around who are we vis-a-vis the machines we've created. A tendency to anthropomorphize where we're handing over the agency to the machine in a way that misapprehends who we are vis-a-vis it. I think one common denominator across the religions that we represent, because we are a pluralist organization, we're creating this channel for the 5 major religions in the world as a pragmatic approach, really, to be better heard. And because these technology issues cross over faith, these various faiths, the faith beliefs may be different, and how those play out with respect to our understanding of who we are vis-a-vis these machines may be different, especially between Eastern and Western, the Abrahamic faiths versus Hinduism, Buddhism, and other Eastern religions. But we all share these fundamental questions about who are we versus who is our creation. And if we confuse those categories, we end up misunderstanding our agency vis-a-vis them, and also what's exceptional about us as humans with respect to consciousness, sentience, and our capacity for self-awareness.
David, when you think about the impact of looking at the world's 5 major religions, what are some of the differences? You've sketched them a tiny bit, but say more about that. I'm so grateful that AI and faith has taken that approach, but what are you learning?
I think the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, share a common set of instructions to a point in the Old Testament. And then the Quran, of course, reinterprets that. And as Christians, we also have the New Testament. So those are religions with a kind of top-down approach. Eastern religions have more of a broader organic base, speaking in very broad terms. And so you see a difference, especially with regard to robots. In Japan, for example, robots are much more acceptable traditionally than in the West. our Western view of robots as a threat. In the East, the barriers are lower between humans and other creatures, and including creatures we make ourselves that function and seem to function a lot like us. So I think that's the biggest difference that I've seen. The top-down nature of the Western religions and the more bottom-up approach of the Eastern religions, fewer defined, defined lines between who we are and other creatures.
Does it follow then that the people who come from more Eastern traditions are less concerned about AI questions, or just differently concerned about AI questions?
I think it's probably both. I mean, I think there's a greater openness. Take, for example, robot priests. Those really became an idea and that translated into actual robots in Japan. And on the West, we looked at that before GPT and thought, well, that's interesting, but not really important. Now we have a new convergence of technology in these faith GPT bots that offer whole new ways of interfacing with text and with other people that suddenly have become very relevant. So
describe that a bit more. What is a AI priest? Just spell that out in a little more detail.
Sure. Certainly over these last 6 months, we've seen this remarkable progress in the ability of these large language models to provide a base for queries that act and sound like us. And whereas previously the idea of a priest in Japan, for example, would be in a sort of worship functional place or some kind of formal role, now suddenly we have highly interactive, seemingly emotionally capable personal assistants or oracles who can answer our questions about just about anything, including life's big questions. And it's almost mystical in its quality. It's also alarming in its ability to make things up, to hallucinate, confabulate, just draw out things that it asserts to be true, which are entirely made up. And there have been a number of examples of that have come out in the press. This lawyer who filed a brief recently that was in federal court and cited 6 cases that were perfect for his position. The citation form was perfect, but the cases were entirely made up. So the judge wasn't too happy because, as a lawyer and a litigator, I mean, you certainly have to read the cases that you cite, no matter what your source is for them. So it was obvious he hadn't done that. Right. But more importantly, it was a very naive use of GPT, given the widely circulated knowledge that it makes things up.
And in that case, did the attorney know that the cases were made up, or what do you know about that part of it? I'm just curious.
Well, interestingly, he asked the GPT, are these real cases? And it told him they were. And and that's certainly not enough. But, I think it either revealed his naivete or competence. I mean,
confirmation bias.
Yeah. So all he needed to do was, search out the cases through the usual means, look them up and see what they said to make sure they were right. And he didn't do that. And now we're all waiting to see in the bar how heavy are the sanctions, because he certainly wasn't taking the care that should be taken. So that was, one example in a context that was easily found out. But the real issues are around the use of GPT, where the person making the query doesn't have a knowledge base to judge whether what they're being told is accurate or not, or trustworthy.
Yes.
And then in the faith context, already people are creating applications using GPT as a base for prayer and for questions about life based on the Bible. It's easy to just plug the Bible in as a sub-training set on top of the big, large language model and then ask it questions. But there's a lot more to the training and to the targeting and to the attempting to control the knowledge base from which the answers are coming than simply plugging in the Bible and asking it to tell you things about it. So one of our goals is to consider both from a theological point of view and from a technology point of view how best to use these interfaces in the context of study of Scripture and discipleship and spiritual formation, other ways that I think people are envisioning the use. And some people are already starting.
So an enterprise like the human-centered AI program newly established at Stanford is an attempt to try to say, let's raise some of these very serious questions. Let's think about what they mean, especially in relationship to human beings themselves and how these two things interact. Tell us a little bit about how you're seeing that concern show itself. If you have comments on the Stanford program, please make them. But I'm just curious in general, if you're finding this sort of attentiveness to the human in the context of AI actually getting the attention it deserves.
I think there are some very interesting programs and conferences and institutes. There are, in addition to the Stanford Human AI-Centered program, which is very large, most of the major Jesuit universities and other Catholic universities in the country have established AI institutes. There's a very good, long-standing Technology Ethics Institute at Santa Clara, which has been the go-to ethics center in the Silicon Valley for 30 years, and others that are forming that are specifically AI-oriented. There's one here in Seattle at Seattle University, another at Duquesne. There's a very large tech ethics center at Notre Dame. And I think those are particularly interesting because they are bringing at least a nominal Catholic perspective along with very sophisticated technology and other philosophical bases as well to these questions. So the challenge for the church, I think, is, and seminaries like Fuller, is how to participate in and stay up with these developments and bring their own orthodoxy in theology to both use of the outputs of the technology and then its application. Is it okay to do this? Is this wise? It's going to be necessary to do something because it's clear this is here to stay unless it turns out they just can't get the hallucinations and confabulations under control. But there's a lot of people working on that, and Microsoft and Google and the other major tech companies have invested now so heavily in this and linked it up to their key products that they're allies for sure in the effort to make this work well.
Right. So where are the gaps that you're feeling concerned about in terms of either research or development or the conversation? Related to that is a further question, which is, are you finding that the work that AI and faith is doing is getting the listenership, the readership, the engagement that you would hope for?
We're trying to reach several different audiences. The tech creator audience, there's real leverage in working with the people who are making this technology. And then the broader audience of consumers, people uptaking the technology, and the faith leaders of those folks in congregations. Already there's been quite a bit of activity, great books being written on the consumer side about social media and its effects, and having fasts from your phone. Also a good deal of concern around justice issues and the algorithmic decision-making issues that people see as people realize more and more what's happening in the employment front, for instance. That presents real questions of fairness. On the technology side, we've been working with an interesting development in the diversity, equity, inclusion world of corporations, which is faith employee resource groups. More and more, the DEI side of companies is including faith as an area of focus and interest on the part of their employees. So these faith ERGs are at Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, and Apple. Microsoft is exploring one. And then wholly apart from them, there are lots of individual faith groups that come under this faith ERG umbrella if the corporation has established one. So they've been having a conference every year for the last 3 years, and we've been a part of that conference, helping them to consider how the faith employee resource group can not only celebrate the diversity of the faiths represented and the value of faith at work, but also how to integrate that into the work in front of them. So to move from a faith belief to an ethical position about that work, and then compare that to the company's ethics and see what might be done to deepen the company's ethical commitment arising out of diverse faith beliefs.
I'm Mark Labberton. You're listening to Conversing.
It's such an amazing, explosive time. It feels like the enterprise itself is exploding, and then the implications of that explosion are so explosive in their own way that everywhere you look, it seems these days, there are conversations about AI. There's anxiety, fear, dramatic passions, both on the upside and on the downside. And I would think in the enterprise that faith in AI is cultivating, or AI and faith is cultivating, is the concern for how do you even keep rigorously enough focused in this to make the kind of deep contributions that you're getting at. And that's where I was curious whether you're getting the kind of readership or viewership engagement that you would hope for.
I think certainly in these last few months, this has become a topic for everybody. And we used to include in our newsletter and on our social media posts general stories about developments with AI as a kind of general education function, background stories, in addition to stories that specifically deal with faith issues in AI. Now we're focusing more heavily on the faith issues, and there's no need to really help people think about the general questions because they're everywhere. The faith issues are beginning to get more play. There are about 20 books or so that have been written over the past 5 years, and the pace is, of course, picking up. There have been great authors like Andy Crouch and Jason Thacker and Chris Martin writing about the impact on culture and on self-perception from these technologies. Other tech professionals writing about the general questions of faith that AI presents, like the ones we've been talking about: human dignity, agency, truth and justice, purpose and meaning of life and work. But there's room for a lot more engagement into the broader secular conversation. I think we're seeing stronger efforts to deepen and create an integrated, more foundational approach on the secular side. A lot of that's coming out of general Enlightenment principles, humanism, basically. And that gives us an opportunity to say yes and. Yes, but what about moving deeper and considering the real foundations for these questions of human dignity, at least broader foundations, either across these faiths or as Christians within our own tradition. Let's take the conversation deeper, sort of back to the type of integration of faith and science that we saw in pre-Enlightenment times.
Right.
The Museum of the Bible, I just visited last week, and they have a new exhibit on science and the Bible, which does that really well. And I think a good model for how you can integrate faith and science, and now this new branch of science, technology, and even more deeper into AI technology in ways that integrate very well.
Yes. Where do you find, from the people that you're talking to, where do you find examples of some of the greatest joy and perhaps even awe? Those are not, I realize, the same thing. But where do you find joy around AI in the faith community or in general? And likewise, where do you find awe, both about the technology probably, but also about its implications in this moment? And how does it intersect in those cases with the content of faith itself?
That's a great question. I think there's real joy among Bible translation. For example, there's
the Illuminations Project, for example.
Yeah, and each year for the last couple of years, there's a conference that's taken place, the Missional AI Summit. sponsored and organized by Wycliffe, SIL, the Big Bible Societies. And they've been working on large language models for a number of years now as the basis for speeding up translation of the Bible. In fact, their large language model was one of the sources that on the secular side for OpenAI and these other models that have been coming forward.
Right.
And Meta, which just announced the expansion of language translation to 1,000 languages, their training set was the same model, I believe, that the big Bible translators had been using. It was certainly a Bible translation model that they started with. So they expanded the available languages dramatically in these last few months. And there you have this wonderful opportunity for people to not only translate the Bible into more languages, but to have seamless conversation in ways we've never had before. So I think there's a great deal of joy in that. Christianity Today is translating using AI tools. Many of their articles into at least a dozen languages. They're serving the global church in that way, and they're building ties across the church. That's wonderful. I think there's also joy in considering the potential use of these technologies at scale with tens of millions of people who make conversions for Christ around the world through very sophisticated online organizations, missional organizations working in difficult to reach countries where you couldn't have a physical presence.
Right.
And one of the challenges is then how do you follow up? Because it's impossible at that scale to link people up with other individuals, at least initially. So, now we have this possibility of having not only a cognitive interface to convey information, but something that feels somewhat relational. And I think that will be rolling out quickly in that space where humans can't be involved. Now, on the other hand, there are all these concerns that we've talked about the enhancing the ability of bad uses of these technologies for surveillance, control, and other things. One of the parts of the mix that's been of particular concern is this new ability to synthesize people and voices.
Yes.
So deep fakes, not just videos of real people. Now they can be completely new people generated to say whatever you want them to say. And so the impact on truth is even of greater concern now. Go into this next political campaign and that's coming up for the presidency and national elections with all this technology. And at a time when people have been already, our ability to discern truth has been eroded. And we're I think entering a period of real concern on the level of political discourse, of understanding what's real and what's not. I mean, that's a source for real immediate concern.
Yes, yes. David, one of the things that I've wondered about, and you've mentioned a few times in your comments, has been the intersection of AI, faith, and justice. And like you, sharing such a passion for issues of justice and fairness and realizing that technology has already shown its biases that are built into ways that algorithms and other things are constructed. I'm just curious what you're seeing, and if you want to make a few comments about that to give people a sense of where you're seeing the particular issues emerging.
The, data sets that are used for training GPTs or for these algorithmic tools are all based on our own activities and the whole enterprise of human thought that's embodied in books and magazines and other things that were in the original set, plus all of our emails and other communications. So they reflect who we are, and who we are flawed people. And that's certainly been evident out in the regular society, and it's equally evident in the data that underlies all of these applications. There's a big secular conference, the Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency Conference, each year around technical solutions to eliminating the bias. And so, always in these applications, people are looking for technology solutions. But those technology solutions also come with many of the same problems that bedevil the original data sets. As you consider what is a solution, what are the standards that you would believe are successful? So hate speech, for example, is what amounts to success in eliminating hate speech? Well, that's a big question, a value-laden question,
Right.
Depending on what you view as hate speech versus truthful speech or speech that is based on good values. So a lot of diversity of opinion there. So no tech solution is going to actually address that ultimately. It's got to be humans interacting with each other, extending grace to each other,
Yes.
understanding different points of view.
Yeah. It's such a turning point in our culture. And obviously many voices are speaking about that. But it does feel that somehow in the last 6 months, what already felt like it was imminent and challenging and out of our control, then suddenly again exploded even further with all of the ChatGPT pieces and people's responses to that and early testings around that. And then the evidence on the part of technologists themselves saying, we really want and need control because this is not going to go well if we don't have the government in some way play a role in setting boundaries or some kind of framework, at least, for how these things should be understood. So given that we're in this volatile season with so much discovery and development happening, with so much potential that is for good and for medical good and social good that at least could theoretically happen, there's also this fundamental theological question. So I guess I'm wondering, for those who are fearful that ChatGPT is going to be God, what do you have to say about that?
I think hope is really important here. And the understanding that we know how the man's story is going to end, the return in our Christian faith tradition with the return of Christ, with the redemption and the restoration of the world. So from an existential point of view, we don't really need to worry about man being eliminated, like so much of the fear of robot overlords. But on the other hand, we know from our apocalyptic scriptures that there's going to be a lot of suffering,
Yes.
And a lot of destruction. And these technologies can enable that. So we ought to be careful, and just out of love of our neighbor and our desire to, bring about flourishing and meaningful life and care for each other, we need to be on guard and seek to boundary these technologies from being misused. So there's a combination of optimism and a stewardship responsibility to move out with the positives, and equally an responsibility to safeguard against the negatives. I think, wise as serpents, innocent as doves.
Right.
That's a good approach to this, as in so much else. I also I've been thinking a lot about the Shema and the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. So here we have new ways of engaging cognitively. We even have ways of engaging emotionally through these tools, sort of a heart. But what we don't have is, the soul or the real origins of love, of consciousness and sentience. We don't have that. We've got functional equivalence, really good equivalence, and perhaps better than our own ability to analyze information and to take actions on, a super fast basis that can be threatening and overwhelm our own ability to respond. But it's not going to ever be the same as how we think and how we interact with each other and real love.
Right. Those are very good words of encouragement, David. I'm reminded of a time not very long ago when I was preaching at a church in Silicon Valley, and I was aware that this church has in it a lot of people who are senior leaders of various technology companies. And I was really struck by a more direct sense of speaking to culture shapers, culture makers, reality constructors, saying in that congregation, your imagination, your efforts, your decisions really matter. And you are there, as all work is meant to be done, as an offering to God. But in this case, you are entrusted at one of the most unique moments of history to do a work that could actually change things for good or change things in another direction or set of directions. And what I love about what you're doing, David, and what is needed in this time is for this conversation about AI and faith to be brought together and to be brought to the fore, both for people who are directly in the forefront of the technology development itself, but also people who, as you say, are people who come from the 5 major religions, particularly in your case, in my case, the Christian faith, where the implications of all of this can help guide, inform, and yes, even boundary what it is that we are going to do with our own freedom. So it shows, again, what a significant human question AI actually is. And I'm very thankful for the work that you're doing.
It's exciting to be in this time period with these developments. Shocking, really, what's happened in the last few months. The technologists are shocked. So I think the rest of us should be paying attention. But we do bring a long-term perspective that's really important to move to the forefront of the conversation as best we can. So I appreciate the chance to have this conversation with you as one way to get the word out. Let's pay attention. Let's use the best theology and guidance that we can take from the Bible and this ancient wisdom that we are fortunate to have in this really important moment.
David, thank you. All the best.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to Conversing on your favorite podcast app to listen to new episodes as they're released. And please leave a review. Conversing is produced by Peter Laberton and distributed by Fuller Studio.